Hi, my name is Joe Santarelli, and I'll be presenting on Chapter 6 of the Handbook of Urban Education. It is titled Urban Schools and the Black Male Challenge, and it is written by Pedro A. Noguera. Okay, so the author's purpose of this is to create awareness of the academic and social challenges that many black males face growing up in our education system, to put on display the issues with high poverty urban areas that not only have an effect on black males' education, but also on their lives in general. And that's something we'll really harp on a lot more later. Um, to show how we can change the system and do our best to benefit black males in education and try to minimize those challenges and disadvantages they face. And then a quote that I took from the introduction is, greater progress in supporting African American males can be achieved on a larger scale through a different approach, one that I and others have described as a broader and bolder approach to school reform. And we'll kind of talk about that more at the end about taking action. Okay, so what is the issue? Many African American males are enrolled in what we call dropout factories, or what the reading kind of calls dropout factories, where academic performance of students has been so low for so long that failure is almost expected in a sense. Yeah, it's just where nothing's really going well for the school, and as they say in this, failure is just almost expected. Obviously, it's not vocalized that failure is expected, but it's just almost felt in a sense like that. And there's a lot of schools like that out there, especially in these high poverty urban areas, and we'll talk about that more next slide. African American males are vastly overrepresented among students that are suspended, referred to special education, and most likely to drop out. And then the school to prison pipeline, we'll talk about that again more next slide a bit. The inability of schools to meet the African American males' needs can be contributing to their steady increase in the U.S. criminal justice system. And that's kind of talking about how this negativity in schools in these dropout factories can lead to that representation of the criminal justice system. Obviously, there's other things going wrong there, but that can be an effect. Okay. So for this next slide, we'll talk about the high poverty urban areas, which is a very important part of this. In poverty dense areas throughout the U.S., issues like drug trafficking, gang-related violence, and other harmful influences on students are extremely prominent. Families, schools, and communities often have a limited ability to counter these, and usually these intertwine with the community. Just because obviously a school is part of a community, and if something is going on, if there's gang-related violence or anything like that, it's obviously going to be associated in the school as well. This can create a lack of trust between students, families, and educators, and it leads to obviously a poor academic relationship if that is going on. Schools maintain a lack of stability when it comes to leadership because of numerous principals and superintendents going in and out. Just a lack of leadership and a lack of really knowing who is your leader, because it's changing so much, leads to a lack of motivation and a decrease in just the order and safety overall of the school. These schools like this create a so-called perfect storm of failure for schools and their education for students. The environment overall just does not support effective teaching and learning as a whole, and failure for students just becomes significantly more likely. The readings refer to a pipeline of progression from elementary school to middle school to high school and then to college. For black male students who reside in these economically depressed areas, there are often breaks in this pipeline, and this is where students are lost. This leads us to the research that was completed that we'll talk about in the next slide. So, the research was completed by the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education and the Center for Research on Fathers, Children, and Family Well-Being. And it was done in New York City. They studied mainly the track of students from 4th to 8th grade, later leading into student studies done on these students' academics in high school as well, not only focusing on exams and standardized tests, but also outside factors and how they had an effect on these students' academic success. For 4th grade standardized exam scores for students who received subsidized lunch or students that had been retained for one grade level were significantly lower on average. So this is basically saying that students who were more impoverished or students that were being held back because of other issues were testing way lower. Mobile students, so students that were moving schools a lot, also showed a significant downtrend, and black male students that attended high performing schools scored much higher than black male students attending lower performing schools, which is showing that black males obviously can do well in school if they're given the ability and not at disadvantages, just like any other student. A significant effect was shown during the middle school years, and that's where that part of the pipeline seems to be really important. Trends throughout middle school only continue on through high school, and we'll kind of harp on that more about the uptrend and the downtrend. Okay. So this graph shows the math proficiency levels of African American males from 4th to 8th grade. As you can see, level 3 and 4 are proficient or above proficient, and those both decreased over the 4 years, and then level 1 and 2 are below proficient, and those both increase. So that's where the percentage goes. And this is kind of showing that the break in the pipeline, and students were lost here, and this is where that downtrend can just continue on, and it just leads to failure, sadly. So the main findings of the research, and this is kind of talking about more of application of what we can do just from figuring out what was good and what was bad about things. Providing intensive individualized academic support to the 2nd through 5th graders that are not performing proficiently, because if they can get back on track and trending upwards, get that uptrend, they are much more likely to be en route to college. So trying to, if they are, below proficient, or if they are on that line, or if they are there, just keeping them there and getting them up there, because we can't let them get on that downtrend. Again, the studies show the importance of getting on track to at least that proficient level, because the downtrend just continues throughout high school. And then for students unable to perform the high-performing schools, or unable to go to the high-performing schools, providing intensive case management for them, before and after school tutoring, mentoring, and extra help as needed wherever, or just assistance in general before entering high school, because as we said, those middle school years are so important, and having that good first step into 9th grade is just immensely helpful in this case. And that's kind of what these studies are harping on a lot. And the third point, increasing school options among towns and neighborhoods to increase the amount of racially and ethnically diverse schools. This one's kind of tough, but it is still possible. And this kind of leads back to the previous chapter in the book, chapter 5, that talks about ethnic matching in schools, and it kind of harps more on the significance of ethnic diversity for students growing up. And I know the last chapter kind of talks more about just good representation of ethnicity in schools and in education, but it's still talking just about the importance of it in general. And then the fourth point, talking about distributing teachers and their experience and effectiveness evenly among schools as possible. High-need schools obviously need this experience and record of effectiveness among teachers, so an even distribution may seem like an obvious statement, but it's not always the easiest thing to do among schools. Some teachers are obviously going to want to go to other schools, and some teachers are going to get paid more in other schools, so it's just a tough thing to get a good handle on. Other findings they found were all high-performing schools were located outside of economically depressed neighborhoods. This concludes that students in these geographically isolated and economically depressed areas are unable to have access to these higher-performing schools, therefore already decreasing the chances of having that smooth transition to 9th grade that we were talking about that was so important. And that's just an immediate disadvantage that they really can't help, which is sad. And then OST programs, which are out-of-school time programs, have had a significant positive effect on academics for Black male students. Linked to more positive behaviors and less negative behaviors, great overall effect on academics, social development, and just health in general. These out-of-school time programs have a wonderful effect on Black male students. There was an increase in academic performance and strong links between homework completion, school attendance, positive attitudes, college aspirations, and many other positive things. There were also decreases in negative behaviors, like we said, such as drug use, teen pregnancy, and juvenile crimes. All right. So taking action. This slide kind of talks about positive action and negative action in a sense. Some of the current endeavors of education reform have led to graduation and college attendance increase, which is good, yet nothing has really changed for Black and Latino males. For them, statistics have actually declined. In fact, since 1977, Black male enrollment in college has increasingly declined, like in a sharp sense. This shows that race and gender neutral approaches to the issue are unlikely to be successful, because most of the issue in the environment there is in the environment they are in, these economically depressed and isolated neighborhoods, as we were talking about. School reform strategies and public policies need to be implemented that specifically focus and address these needs of the black male youth. Um, they want power to be taken away from union, or um, and that's kind of what I was just talking about before about how important it is, because we can't just have that race and gender neutral approach. We need to focus more in on what's going on in their lives and their economic situation and just where they're growing up. Um, and then Joel Klein, Michelle Rhee, and Joe Williams argued that bad teaching rather than poverty is the primary cause of failure in schools. And this is kind of countering that a bit. Um, their strategy is kind of weird. It isn't saying some students it's not saying students can't do it, which is a good thing, but it still implies that reform is merely just an education strategy, and it's not simple as that. They want power to be taken away from unions and others who defends the status quo, and they want charter schools to replace these failing public schools. Um, they want to shut down failing schools and evaluate teachers by scores and release these scores to the public. Their idea is just based around this simple education strategy, and that just won't solve it. It's not that simple. As we kind of talked about previously, African American males are actually affected more negatively by these reform strategies, given that incarceration and dropout rates are at an all-time high. Black males are not only challenged by the education system, but by society as a whole. The labor market, the healthcare system, government, etc., they are put at a disadvantage. Their presence of the criminal justice system is at an all-time high and only increasing. Of the 6 million people in prisons in the United States, over 50% of them are black males. So, and the sad thing is that school is usually the beginning of socializing black males into this criminal justice system, showing how important schooling is. So, next slide kind of talks about positive action. During studies, 20 high schools were found to have a black male graduation rate of 80%, as compared to an average rate of 40%, which throughout the rest of New York City, and more studies were done. Kind of talking about the disadvantages of black males face in everyday life is getting significant. A lot of their lives can be changed in that K through 12 process, and getting them into high quality schools, even if they are in a poor economic place, can have extremely positive effect on their lives and how they turn out. People in these economically depressed and geographically isolated zones refer to or deserve a fair chance at life as well. And at these schools that we're kind of talking about here, different stages were implemented, strategies, sorry. Some of the schools tried to place students in more academically challenging courses, such as physics, and higher level writing and math courses, and some of them had individual mentors and just things that would help them in their whole life and not just school. That's kind of what we were talking about earlier as well. They would focus on the whole life of the student because they knew that was what had the biggest effect on their success. They also focused on the social and emotional development and kept the importance of learning known as well. Strong, trusting, and overall positive relationships were created between teachers and students, and the school leaders were wonderful as well. And one student at the school actually reported their principal as a big brother / father-like figure, which I'm sure shows that they had a very significant effect on their life. So, and like I said earlier, a lot of these students or schools were actually in economically depressed areas, and they found a way, which is what's important. Okay, so for the final slide, closing remarks, black males are significantly disadvantaged in today's society, but access to high-quality education systems can have a significant change on their lives and set them up for success. Environmental conditions have the largest effect on academic success of students, and educational reform isn't just a simple change in education strategy. And the final quote that I found that kind of meant something a lot, that kind of sums us all up, is children do not exist in a vacuum cleaner, and neither do the schools they attend. It's basically saying the schools and children don't have to live in what they were born into, and that they deserve a chance just as everyone else does. Just because some students grow up in a more disadvantaged place in life does not mean they should have less access to a high quality education. Just because some schools are significantly underperforming for a long time does not mean they are stuck in this spiral of failure. They can get out of it and help students out through a true reform that implements all of the effective strategies we have just talked about. Although African American male students deserve just as much of a chance as anyone else, and to kind of sum it up, African American male students deserve just as much of a chance as anyone else, obviously, and they should not have to be troubled with the disadvantages they have. They're already going through a lot, so our reforms need to be based around assisting them in any way we can. So, thank you.